welcome you all to another episode of the Byproduct Podcast. I am your host, Ian Prukner, and I'm excited to be here with you getting better together, because when we get better, things get better. And I'm excited for you to meet a great friend of mine, a serial entrepreneur, just an absolutely incredible guy, Brian McNally. Welcome to the show, Brian. It's an honor to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ian. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, man. We've been working on putting this together for a little while, and and I don't ask a lot of people to be on the podcast, but I wanted to ask you because you inspire me. I'm not easily inspired, but you have this sort of drive for excellence that is evident in all that you do, whether it's your hobbies or your family or your health or your business. You're just one of the most energetic, driven people that I've met. And it sort of seems like you love the game, whatever game you're playing, not necessarily just the scoreboard of the game. That's really a refreshing thing, because there's so many people out here, they just want to show you the scoreboards. And Brian, listen, like me, you have scoreboards that you could talk about ad infinitum probably, right? You just sold a business and a pretty sizable transaction. You've got a lot of other amazing things going, but you really love the game, and it's evident in what you do. And so I want the people that listen to this show to hear from you, because that's my heart for them, right? Is that the man that loves to walk will walk further than the man that loves the destination, right? And if we can dial into that, like, how do I get great and love that? Everything else takes care of itself. So Brian, give us the 30,000 foot view. Who is Brian McNally? Where did you start? What motivated you to get into what you were doing? Talk a little bit about the company that you built. You see the Inc. 5000 stuff on the wall behind you, the exit process, all of that. Give us sort of a 30,000 foot view.
Yeah. So bootstrapped the company from the ground up with my business partner after spending a long toiling away with large bureaucracies in organizations that I just hated. And we were in the healthcare space. So we focused in on the revenue cycle of hospitals. So helping them fight with the insurance companies, get paid, make sure that patients had their coverage. So it was rewarding from that perspective, making sure that patients were actually getting taken care of and services were being compensated by the insurance companies. We bootstrapped that from 0 to 50 million in annual revenue in 7 years.
Wow.
Had a great time along the way. 2019, we were 281 on the Inc. 5000 list, and then stayed on that list for 3 subsequent years. I kind of regret not doing it the last year. 5 times in a row sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was good. 5 would have been better. But we didn't do that because we were in the middle of selling the business, but had an exit to a strategic buyer in our space that was backed by a private equity firm. So we were the first bolt-on to that platform organization.
I love it. That's amazing. So a couple of things you said. You said you've always been a team player. It's been more important, the team results than the personal results. But I have an inkling that you are also a personal killer, right? That like, it wasn't like, oh, the team. It was the team, and I am going to get my job done. I'm going to lead from the front. Talk a little bit about the leader versus the manager, right? Because the manager works through the team. They don't want to do the work. The leader works with the team and drives that team. Talk to me a little bit about leadership versus management in your mind.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is setting a vision, right? And setting values for the organization. I'm not just talking about the value and the mission statement on the wall. I mean, I'm talking what you live and breathe every day. How are you going to make decisions in the tough times? That's values and character. And like I said, I was kind of raised that way. I'm a handshake kind of guy. So I live and die by my character. My word is my bond, and I would rather lose everything than lose that, right? And so my team knows that. Everyone knows that. And I wouldn't accept anyone in my business operating any other way, right? So we had a statement in the company called "We do what's right, not what's common," and that was an underlying theme. When a tough decision had to be made, everybody in the company knew, okay, we got to do what's right here. It's not about just lining my pocket or winning the day, in some little way. It's about how are we going to build a reputation for people that the market would want to work with, and how can we put our heads on the pillow at night? I want to win, but I want to be able to put my head on the pillow at night and know that I did it the right way. And
that's possible, right? It is possible
100%.
to win in a humongous way and do it in a way that you feel good about and the people around you feel good about. And people who know you best can look at you and say, you know what, that's somebody who, they're not always perfect, but you best believe that they're going to do the very best they're capable of. Talk a little bit about that balance, because I meet a lot of people that think like, I've got to be somebody that I'm not to win, or I'm going to have to do things that aren't right to win. And that's just not true. That's dependent on the leader that's doing the winning, right?
I would say, actually, if you want to win at all, you need to operate that way. Because if the game's long enough, in the short term, yeah, you might be able to get ahead.
Woo!
You might get a
So good.
lead acting that way. But in the
You won't
a
keep
long
one.
enough time frame, you're going to lose and I'm going to win because I'm going to win out. That will catch up to you. It's just like a lie. You can't carry it forever.
Wow. Guys, listen, there's so much wisdom in that statement, right? That like you might get ahead, but you won't win the game if the game is long enough. And guess what, y'all? In business, the game is a dadgum lifetime. It's a lifetime, right? And so you've got to show up in this way or it's gonna bite you sooner or later. You know, one of the other things you talked about was you starting at 29,000. If you worked really hard, you'd be at 75,000. You're like, who do I got to kill to get that, right? But one of the things that I wrote down here as I was taking some notes is that experience is greater than income, at least in the beginning, right? Like that's what you said, hey, you know, I wasn't making very much money, but I got to watch a company grow. I got to be a part of something going from nothing to something. And that experience helped mold you and gave you some of the tools that you needed then to grow your own deal from nothing into something. Talk a little bit about that delayed gratification, building things the right way sort of mindset there. Like, hey, I didn't mind that I wasn't rich yet. I was rich in experience that helped me create a lot of financial resource.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I think it's hugely important to learn every day. And I would say that theme carried on multiple times throughout my career. I left jobs. I was in business development sales, right? I left jobs multiple times where I was about to peak my compensation. It was about to keep growing, but I left to gain a new skill and knowledge and experience. So
Wow.
I went from pure staffing and a startup to business process outsourcing and consulting firms. So I get to see this 360 view of all these different roles within business and in healthcare, and my knowledge base expanded. And every bit of that along the way ended up coming back and being something that allowed me to win when I started my business. So in the early days with the startup, one of the big things we struggled with because we were growing so fast was office space, right? So when I started my business, we bought a building. We're not dealing with that. We're going to take care of it. You know, we're going to have that pay for this asset. So we made smart decisions that way. We didn't have to make those mistakes. The cultural piece, right? I saw what pushed people out and what didn't. And so we always said, when we build the organization, I want to be the type of person that I would have wanted to work for, right? And so those things always go for it. It's not about the immediate. It's like anything else, right? Pain today, pride tomorrow. You got to go through the tough times. You got gather those skills. Like you do the hard thing every day and then learn from it. Put it in the memory bank because it's gonna come. There's gonna come a time you're gonna see that situation again, and that experience and doing that work is gonna pay off.
Yeah. Long-term perspective plus short-term urgency, right? Like
Yep.
That's got to be together. So you got to be hustling to kill it where you can, but not shortcut it. You know, John Maxwell always says that the longest distance between 2 points is a shortcut. All right. And I love that because it's true, right? And so that's what you're talking about, having this long-term perspective that, hey, I could have stayed short-term where I was and gotten a short-term win out of that, more compensation, maxing out my stuff, but I would have been lacking the things that I needed and experience that I got by making those moves. And that is a quintessential long-term thinker. I'm willing to give up short-term gain for long-term significance and value. And that's just so opposite, Brian, of like the world we live in today. Obviously, you're an employer. I'm an employer. Like finding people that can think longer than 3 hours in front of their face is a real challenge today. But yet that's what the people that win big and consistently, that's a key too, right? And consistently, this is a mindset they all have. I'm the product. I've got to get better. When I get better, anything I touch is going to be better versus what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? So talk to me about some of the challenges you had along the way. So you built this company from 0 to 50 million in revenue in 7 years. That's pretty quickly. It's a pretty sizable business, right? What were some of the key challenges along the way that you encountered and how did you overcome them?
They evolved over time. In the beginning, right, the key challenge number one was first client, finding team members, right? So it was me and my business partner doing everything. Like I said, we bootstrapped it. There was no capital other than what we put into the business and our sweat equity. But talk about consistency. We just did the right things every day. We talked about having that urgency. We worked really hard and we just kept going and kept going. No one knew who we were. You know, you're in a marketplace. We're like, you know, we're coming up with, our name was Emilio. No one ever heard of it before. It means better or best. In Italian, my business partner's an Italian guy. And we just kept going every day and made a name for ourselves. But one of the things that we did, that consistency over time and those consistent behaviors and doing the right thing led to people starting to recognize who we were, right? So then we got some momentum and we grew. But then that came with a whole other set of challenges, right? How do we maintain the level of growth we had? We hit 20 million was our target in 2020. So we had just done 10 million the year before. We were on pace from a run rate to double that year again in 2020. So the whole company was rallying around 20 in 2020. It was our rally cry. COVID happens. We lose 50% of our business in 6 weeks. I'm supporting hospitals. Hospitals shut down. I mean, hemorrhaging money. It was really tough. But again, stay the course, do the work every day, do what you can. It was no massive pivot. It was just little tweaks here and there and just being consistent and showing the team that we weren't going to run from this. We were going to put our heads down. We're going to come through. And yeah, this year may not be as good as how it's been, but on the other side of this, we're going to be okay. We just have to stay consistent and rally around each other. And that was a major lesson learned. It's one thing to say you're the leader and that you're not going to give, but to show up every day with that smile on your face and kind of making everyone see you work just as hard, even though I was having some dark times. I mean, on a personal side, I struggled through that. I fell into some bad habits again. I was drinking and just eating bad food and all the things that, the woe is me stuff that makes you feel good in the moment. So, I mean, it almost got me. And then I read David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me, canceled my social medias and realized I was like, hey, man, you need to man up, stop being a bitch and go make this team see what real character looks like. And we did.
And it's easy to be a leader when everything's going well. Your dog could be a leader when everything goes well, right? Just roofs in that direction, everybody goes. But it's in times of trial and controversy and challenge that real leadership is born. And it's at that time that people crave stability and consistency and leadership more than anything, right? And so that's the idea. Like, people ask me, why do you prepare so many? You're always preparing, always working on things. I'm a big consistency guy too. One of my favorite mantras is it's the little things done daily that create the big wins that everybody wants, right? Yeah. It's the little things, not the big things, not the big breakthroughs. You create your own breakthroughs by stacking little things tall enough where you can see them, right? And yet most people don't get that. They want to prepare when their opportunity comes. Like, when this happens, then I'll get ready. But then you're too late, right? And so you were preparing this whole time and COVID hits and it's negative and dark and things are moving backwards, but you were able to show up in a big way. One of the things that go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, honestly, I prepared my life years before the business, right? We talk about being prepared and making sacrifices and the small decisions that you make, everything down to not getting the premium channels on cable, not going to Starbucks with my wife for years prior to starting the business. When I was making good money as a salesperson, all my friends were driving BMWs. I drove a 2011 Kia Optima that I had paid off almost until the year I sold the business. I was making $1 million a year driving a car that I had paid off 5 years before because it wasn't what I valued. And that flexibility, that ultimately is what gave me that flexibility. So those short-term sacrifices, right? I mean, a great book, Compound Effect. I was doing a presentation to some kids recently at a gym back home. It's a charitable boxing gym called Costello Boxing Club. And I talked about the power of those small decisions and just used like a Hershey Kiss as an example. You can have one every day. It doesn't seem like a big deal. See how many pounds you put on at the end of the year because you're eating Hershey Kiss every day, right?
Yeah.
Or conversely, read a couple pages of a book every day and see the positive impact of it, right?
Yeah. What's so interesting there, right, is people probably thought you were interesting, that you were having so much success, or maybe even doubted the success that you were having because you're not driving a fancy thing. And I have lots of cars and we've been making money for a long time, but that's one of the things, process over scoreboard, right? Like the car is sort of the scoreboard, but you're like, hey, I'm not going to jeopardize my process for the scoreboard right now because I've got a much bigger win than a car in the future, but I've got to be able to make it through those tough times. And that's what most entrepreneurs, that's what kills them, right? Is they've got their businesses and their lives structured with so little margin, Brian, right? It's like all the stars have to align and the weather's got to be perfect. And if everything goes just right, we might get this done. And that's not a way to live or to play, right? Like, you got to play the game well enough that you take 2-3 bad calls from the umpire and still win the game and not be complaining about the bad calls. If you're complaining about bad calls or a shutdown or whatever, you were too close to the line to begin with, right? Like, and you that's what I talked about at the beginning. Like, you have always struck me in our limited time physically together, right? Like, as somebody who is really a process driven guy, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna get into those dailies and those habits and those consistencies, and I'm gonna drive them. I'm not gonna worry about the scoreboard. It's gonna take care of itself. So, you were talking about the problems mutating, evolving. One of my favorite things that I love to tell people is new levels, new devils, right? The things that affected you previously are not going to affect you. You get to graduate. Your problems have more zeros and smarter and tougher adversaries, right? Like, that's really what you get. Yeah, the bigger you play, the bigger and smarter and more powerful and well-resourced your competition is. Talk a little bit about how you reacted to that, right? Because a lot of guys, they want that next level of success, but they're not mentally tough enough to take the next level of heat that comes with that. How does somebody start preparing for that?
I think you just got to keep challenging yourself and understand that is going to be the case. So, I would talk to friends and family and just talk about some of these situations and just the gravity of them. Like, I don't know how you do this. How are you not freaking out right now? It's just my life. It's just my day. It's the same. It's no different, right? Like, you added a zero to the problem. The problem's still the problem. I'm going to work it the same way. You can't let the size of it start to impact your decision. You just have to work your process, right? And this goes back to having a values system, and so at the end of the day, we wanted to grow. Like, we valued growth and our integrity and like the brand of the business over everything, right? So if we had to make a decision, what's our North Star? What's going to support growth? What's going to support our values? How are we going to, and so the size of the problem kind of goes away. It's really irrelevant. If you're true to yourself and how you operate, you just work the problem.
Yeah. One of the things that is so interesting to me when I meet other people that have sold their businesses, it's sort of like, I don't want to call it a club. It's not a club, but you sort of get each other, right? Because sort of the path you had to walk to get there. And in my opinion, somebody who can sell a business and that business continues on beyond them, that's like, to me, a really sort of a pinnacle of leadership when it comes to business, right? Because what you've done is what you've built and the systems you built and the people that you built and your character and your values, the things that you built as a culture have outlived you. They continue to influence even though you're not there to influence. And to me, that's the real test of a leader, is when that leader is absent, does their influence live on? And so that's happened for you in your, exit, where you've built this thing, you've built these teams, you've built these processes, culture, values. Those things were important. You instilled them. You try to live them, right? You lived the message, not just spoke the message. And that created a team and a system that was able to endure and thrive even without you. And so how did you do that? What were some of those key components in the culture that you're like, hey, these 2 or 3 things are what allowed me to build something that has outlived my tenure in that thing?
Yeah, so there's a kind of couple key steps that we worked out after the fact, a little post-mortem on it. I actually did a presentation a while back. Wow, these are really good themes to think about. We did it kind of inherently. It wasn't necessarily by design, but like I said, we did it. Who would we want to work for, right? What type of organization? The first thing we did was we created a shared mission. I think so often leaders, it's their mission, it's their goal, and you all need to just go help me achieve it, right? In a way, it needs to be a shared mission. The whole team needs to be, a little transparency goes a long way, right? So we told the team, hey, we want to be a certain size by this size, and eventually we're going to sell, and we want you all to partake in that. So the one thing is create that. So everyone pushed for the same goal. We were all on the same page. Their goal was my goal. So that was great. I think that's a really key thing. So you can rally around that. The next thing we did was we aligned compensation for everybody in the organization with the organizational goals. Even our administrative staff, we had a lot of sales and commissioned employees, but the people that weren't on our internal organization, who had just salaries and weren't really impacting that, we still wanted to incentivize them for the business to do well. So they got quarterly bonuses based on the overall performance of the company. Because, hey, you're supporting, doing the little extra things, we're all going to win. The other part was empowering the team, giving them agency over their desks. So little things like they were empowered to make certain level of decisions up to a certain cost, and they kind of knew where we stood. We're like, and normally the question was, well, is it the right thing to do? And they'd say yes. Okay, go ahead and do it, right? So they didn't have to seek permission often. They knew what had to be done, and we just empowered them to do it. Kept people off my desk, and they felt like had a level of control, right? And I think, and that makes people want to be part of the company more and really kind of ingrain themselves with it. Now that we also the other component of that was we talked about flexibility with accountability, meaning we had very flexible schedules. No one missed a kid's recital or a sporting event. It was important to us as an organization that our team members got to do those things. But it comes at a price, right? We still had to get the work done. So you either rely on a teammate or you pick it up some other time. So that was the flexibility. But at the end of the day, we were accountable to each other. So giving people agency in their decision-making process, ensuring that everyone's accountable to each other goes a really long way. Those bonds start to get built. That trust gets created. And really, it's like an organism. It kind of takes care of us. If someone is not carrying that weight and everyone else is, it didn't take me
to jettison them. Yeah.
The team comes to me and says, "Hey, this isn't working. They're breaking down. They're not living up to it, and it's messing up my day, and it's causing more problems." And I can tell you, there was a couple different times throughout the years where we tried to hire up and grow the team, and we got a little bit away from our hiring practices. What we looked for were gritty, critical thinking rule breakers. Because we felt like they were problem solvers who get things done. And our job, staffing's pretty gritty kind of business, right? It's a lot of challenges every day. And once you get those people together and you empower them and you kind of set that culture, they're taking care of it themselves. And now they take ownership of it, right? And now that's why it is able to live on without us, because, when we had to make a decision on process or how we were going to do something, we went to the team. You're the one doing it. You tell me, how is this going to work best?
Yeah, and you involve them in the process. You involve them in the process. You create a lot of ownership and a lot of alignment. And people don't quit on things they own because they're quitting on themselves, right? That's what they're quitting on. I love that.
My team basically led the integration into the new company. They were working with everybody. They explained, the integration. The consultants are coming to me. And I'm like, well, go to them. They know what they're doing.
And Brian, you touched on something that is very rare. And so I just want to hit on this because we had this too. And it's one of the rarer things that I've seen. We do a lot of business consulting and coaching these days. And I get a lot of different people from a lot of different industries that saw what we did and say, hey, can you come help us here? And almost never do I find what I call the self-policing organization. But that's what you just described there, right? The culture sort of became a herd immunity against bad players, bad actors, and people who didn't fit. In other words, most organizations, discipline comes top down. It's very heavy-handed, and it's a spirit of rules and regulation. But what you created, what we created, was a self-policing organization. We all value these things and this path. And so when there are people in our boat that don't value these things, we're going to help them value them, or we're going to move them to a different boat, but they're not going to stay here. And that's a really, really powerful place to go, because now you have eyes everywhere. You have the heartbeat of the organization everywhere, and people have that empowerment to say, hey, I'm in some control of my environment and of what's going on here, and I want to use and leverage that control for the good of everybody, because there's ownership, because there's alignment. Talk to me specifically, if you can, how did you create that sort of self-policing? It's not, and that's not like tattletale, but like one of my guys in one of my former businesses, he was a detective in the Detroit Police Department. And Detroit's an interesting place, born and raised in Southeast Michigan. Interesting place, okay? But one of the things that was interesting, when I was training him, we went to his precinct, and he was just following up on, he was a detective, he was following up on some things. He called 3-4 people. And Brian, it was the most interesting conversation I've ever heard. It was verbatim over and over and over. He was following up on a shooting that he had responded to. And every single one of the people, if they picked up, they're like, oh, I don't know nothing about that. Mm-hmm. And he's like, man, you called us. I met you at the scene, right? And, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Next one, same thing. After 3 or 4 of those, I'm like, bro, what is going on? He said, they don't want to tell, because if they tell, there's going to be repercussions. And I'm like, well, why did they call you then? Like, well, they call us to break up the altercation. They don't want the shooting and the violence, but as soon as it's broken up, you ain't going to get anybody to tell on anyone there. And he said something that never will leave me. He said, as sad as it sounds, it's almost better if the victims are dead. because then we can prosecute them and we don't need these people's buy-in to pursue the crimes.
Wow.
Right? Because if they're not here to represent themselves, then the state will take up their case. But if they're here and they got a decision of whether or not they're going to press charges, said they ain't ever pressing charges. We're just out here trying to stop the shooting, right? And I'm like, holy smokes, that's crazy. But then you look at other communities, right? I'm next door in Siesta Key where I live, and it's like, man, if your cat meows too loud, there's like a 17-person committee about like the rules for cat behavior. And there are communities that self-police because they all value the community.
Right.
And they might be a little overbearing and overzealous sometimes, but I'd rather that than have to worry about who's shooting at me from across the way and whether or not they're. How did you develop that instead of top down, leadership in the people to everybody's a leader? Everybody has that power.
Well, just from a structural perspective, we had a very flat organizational chart. We didn't have a lot of middle managers and people to report it to. So we had like a mentor, mentee sort of structure because we really looked at it and said, if I have to manage your productivity every day, you're not right for this organization. So it almost starts in the hiring process, right?
Sure.
You get the right person in, and then we didn't have a lot of those you report to me sort of things. So everyone was somewhat of a peer, and we made that very clear. There is no hierarchy. I mean, there's us, and then there's everyone else, and guess what? We're part of you too. So, feel free to call me out. I mean, I made it known that if I'm messed up, I want to hear about it, right? Because the business doesn't get better if you're afraid to talk to me and tell me where I'm not, delivering.
Yeah, so
and
good.
I went for the entire team. On our meetings, I really pushed a culture of healthy confrontation. In the staffing world, you put out a job and then the sales team and then the recruiters have to fill it. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin, and it can get a little contentious sometimes. And I encouraged it a little bit, right? Because it was very clear when people weren't carrying their weight, and it was okay, in a healthy way to say, hey, just ask some questions. Well, how many calls did you make? Why didn't it happen? Can you give me some feedback so I can do this? Just asking more questions and digging deeper. It's uncomfortable in front of a room full of people.
Sure.
But once we got real comfortable being uncomfortable, then it kind of goes away. So it was just over time of having these challenging conversations, operating out of a pure meritocracy, and removing that hierarchy from the organizational chart to begin with. I think three key elements.
It takes a lot of courage as a leader, too, to put yourself out there that way. But it also endears your people to you. They see you as riding with them in the battle instead of just directing them in the battle, which is amazing. So, Brian, unfortunately, we are short on time. It's been such a captivating conversation. We should do this again here. I feel like there's a lot more wisdom that we can unpack. Before you go today, how do people connect with you further? Where can they find you? How do they connect with you? See what you're up to? Get involved in any of the things that you might have to offer out there. How do they do that?
Yeah, so I'm just getting back on social media, guys. So McNally_B on Instagram, Brian McNally on Facebook, Brian McNally on LinkedIn. I'm building out brianmcnally.com, but that'll just take you to my LinkedIn. Any one of those ways you can reach me. I am looking to support a lot of middle-class kids and just inspiring younger kids. So I'm going to do some motivational speaking. Costello Boxing Club in Philadelphia is a charitable organization I want to support. So any help there. I am actively training for an MMA fight later this year. So more to come on that. So follow me. I'm going to be putting a lot out there on that. I want to raise a lot of money for some charities.
I love it. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time and your investment today. A lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. Congratulations on all your success. But more than that, congratulations on your heart and the person that you've become in the process. I hope you're proud. And I know you're not done yet. You're just getting started. And I'm excited to see Brian 2.0 in the next ventures that you decide to go and conquer. So thank you, everybody. And until next time, we'll see you soon.